Welcome to our channel. If you have ever felt powerless against unreasonable regulations, been pressured by those in power within your community, or simply wanted to protect your rightful interests, then today's story is for you. We believe that everyone has the right to stand up and defend what belongs to them, and the best way to do that is to understand the law, unite with the community, and never back down in the face of injustice. If you agree, hit the like button to support meaningful content. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss inspiring stories of justice and perseverance, and share this video with your friends and family so they too can see that anyone can fight back and reclaim their rights. Let's build a strong community together where every voice matters. Now, let's dive into this gripping story. Under the clear blue sky of a peaceful morning, I stood frozen on my front lawn, my eyes locked on the HOA's truck, hauling away my $10,000 solar panels I had just installed the day before. Each sleek, polished panel, a symbol of my investment in a greener future, was being roughly dragged onto the truck like garbage. My heart clenched. They had no idea that I was the government investigator assigned to look into their abuses of power. I wondered, if they knew, would they have dared to commit theft right in front of me? My hands shook as I ripped open the thick envelope the HOA had just handed me. Notice of violation was boldly printed in bright red ink at the top, a declaration of their merciless authority. They demanded that I remove all my solar panels within 48 hours, or I would face a $100 fine per day. I slumped into my kitchen chair, my eyes fixed on the $11,000 receipt from SunNow Solutions, still held to my refrigerator by a cheerful smiley face magnet. Every dollar I had saved to invest in clean energy was now under threat by a group of people wielding power that no one had ever given them. This must be a mistake, I muttered, flipping through the letter, trying to find some logic in this madness. My phone buzzed, a message from my neighbor, Marcus. Saw Diane taking pictures of your roof this morning. Everything okay? I clenched my jaw. Diane Mercer, the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, lived 3 houses down in a pristine white colonial, with hedges so perfectly trimmed they looked measured with a ruler. She had been eyeing me with disapproval ever since last summer, when I painted my front door navy blue instead of the HOA-approved beige. If anyone in this neighborhood was going to lead the charge against my solar panels, it was Diane. I rushed to my home office, rifling through my paperwork until I found the document I needed, Form 32B, Exterior Modification Request, with a clear signature from Richard Thompson, the HOA president, dated 6 weeks ago. They had approved this installation, so why the sudden reversal? A sharp knock at the door cut through my thoughts. I opened it, unsurprised to see Diane standing there. Pressed khakis, a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest, silver bob perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. She didn't bother with a greeting, just gave me a smug smile. I see you've received our notice, she said, her cold gaze scanning me as if I were a vandal. I have written approval, I replied, holding up the document with Richard's signature. Diane snatched it from my hand, skimmed it quickly, then scoffed. This document is outdated. The board passed new aesthetic guidelines last month. All exterior modifications must now be reviewed by the architectural committee. I was never informed of any new guidelines, I protested. Her smirk widened. It was in the HOA newsletter. I suppose you didn't read it. My fist clenched. Richard approved this himself, didn't he? Richard isn't the final authority, she replied coolly. The board votes as a unit, and we've determined these solar panels violate Section 8, Paragraph 3 of our community standards. No installations that detract from the neighborhood's harmonious appearance. I felt my blood rush to my face. These solar panels are protected under state law. The HOA can't arbitrarily ban them. Save the legal lecture, Diane scoffed, shoving the paper back into my hands. Take them down or start paying fines. The choice is yours. She turned to leave, but just before stepping off the porch, she glanced back with a smug grin. Oh, and your grass is half an inch too tall. Expect a violation notice next week. The door slammed shut behind her. My breath came in quick, sharp bursts. They didn't just want to control my roof. They wanted to control every part of my life. My phone buzzed again. Good news, my boss's voice came through as I answered. The governor just approved a special investigation into HOAs, obstructing renewable energy installations. We need someone with both technical knowledge and first-hand experience to lead the case. Are you interested? I glanced out the window. Diane stood on the sidewalk, speaking with another board member, gesturing toward my house. I smiled. I think I'm the perfect person for the job. I sat motionless in my chair, staring at the HOA violation notice. The bold red letters seemed to dance on the page. 48 hours to remove the panels or face a $100 daily fine. But what infuriated me the most was that I had HOA approval in writing. The document, signed by Richard Thompson, was still in my hands. And yet, now they were suddenly citing new aesthetic guidelines as an excuse to revoke it. A blatant lie. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, my ever-vigilant neighbor. Diane was taking pictures of your roof this morning. You okay? I narrowed my eyes. Diane Mercer, the self-appointed neighborhood enforcer, always nitpicking over the smallest things to force compliance with HOA rules. But this time, she had gone too far. I double-checked all my documents. There was no regulation banning solar panels, and more importantly, state energy protection laws explicitly stated that HOAs could not arbitrarily prevent renewable energy installations. If they wanted to play by the rules, I would show them exactly who they were up against. I stepped outside, carefully mounting a small surveillance camera on my front porch. If they tried anything behind my back, I would have proof. Less than an hour later, a knock echoed at my door. I opened it to find Richard Thompson, the HOA president, standing before me. He didn't seem the least bit surprised to see me holding the approved permit in my hand. I assume Diane spoke with you, he said in a calm, measured tone, the voice of someone accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed. I have your approval right here, I replied, keeping my voice steady but firm. Richard glanced at the document I held out, then let out a theatrical sigh. Yes, but I didn't anticipate how much this installation would impact the overall aesthetic of the neighborhood. I let out a dry laugh. Solar panels are supposed to be on the roof, Richard. They need sunlight. We're not unreasonable people, Richard continued. His tone as smooth as a politician trying to placate an angry voter. We can waive the fines if you remove them now. I crossed my arms. And where exactly am I supposed to reinstall them? In my north-facing backyard where there's no sunlight? Richard shrugged. That's a technical issue for you to solve, not us. The point is, they cannot remain on your roof. For the first time, I saw the mask of civility slip from his face. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was a power play. I stepped closer, locking eyes with him. And what if I refuse? A flicker of hesitation crossed Richard's face, but he quickly regained his composure. We have enforcement measures. I'd advise you not to escalate this unnecessarily. Escalate? I scoffed. You have no idea who you're dealing with, do you? Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly thrown off by my words. I turned my back and stepped inside, shutting the door right in Richard's face. As soon as the door clicked shut, I pulled out my phone and called my boss at the State Energy Commission. You're saying your HOA is trying to forcibly remove your solar panels, my boss repeated. Not just mine. Marcus had his application unfairly rejected too, and I suspect there are many others. There was a brief silence on the line, then my boss let out a quiet chuckle. Good. We just launched a special investigation into HOAs obstructing renewable energy installations. I need a lead investigator, and I don't think there's anyone better suited than you. I glanced out the window. Diane stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, deep in conversation with another board member. It was obvious they were discussing me. I turned back to the phone, smiling for the first time all day. Consider it done. The sun had barely risen when I took a sip of my hot coffee, my eyes glued to my phone screen. The security camera feed showed a small truck stopping in front of my house in the early hours of the morning, idling for a few minutes before driving off. I didn't need a closer look to know who it was. The HOA was watching me. My phone rang. Marcus. You've got company. The HOA just showed up at your place with a work crew. I rushed to the door. On my front lawn, Richard Thompson stood with a group of workers, a truck parked in the driveway. Diane Mercer was busy scribbling on a stack of papers, looking pleased with herself. Stop right now, I shouted, striding toward them. One of the workers had already propped up a ladder, preparing to climb onto my roof. Richard turned around, smirking. "You had plenty of time to take them down yourself," he said coolly. "Now the HOA will handle it." "You have no right." I stepped closer, gripping my phone tightly, ready to start recording. Diane raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Section 14 of the HOA covenant. You signed it when you bought your home. The board has the authority to enforce compliance by any necessary means." I shook my head and held up my phone. "And the state has laws prohibiting HOAs from blocking renewable energy installations. You're violating state law." Richard crossed his arms, still exuding confidence. "Then sue us. But in the meantime, those panels are coming down." A loud crack split the air. I whipped around to see one of the workers jamming a crowbar under a solar panel, prying it loose from my roof. Rage surged through my chest. "I warned you." I pressed 911 right in front of them. "I need police at 147 Sycamore Lane. The HOA is illegally removing my property." Diane smirked. "Calling the cops won't change anything. We have legal backing." I locked eyes with her, my voice steely. "You just broke my window, and I have it all on camera." Diane took a half step back. Richard's expression darkened. Just then, Marcus and a few other neighbors appeared, phones raised, recording everything. "What the hell is going on?" A sharp voice cut through the tension. Mrs. Jenkins, who lived at the end of the street, strode forward, her face red with anger. "Who gave you the right to destroy someone else's property?" Sirens wailed in the distance. I turned to see two police cruisers rolling into the neighborhood. Richard clenched his jaw, subtly signaling the workers to stop, but two panels had already been ripped from my roof, now lying haphazardly on the back of the truck. Two officers stepped out. One was a seasoned-looking man, his stance calm but authoritative. "What's going on here?" I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady. "I have legal approval for these solar panels. The HOA unilaterally changed the rules and is now destroying my property." The officer turned to Richard. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Thompson." Richard rubbed his chin, struggling to maintain composure, though his lips twitched slightly. "We are simply enforcing community regulations." "By breaking my window?" I held up my phone and played the video showing the exact moment my window shattered during their so-called enforcement. The officer watched the footage and let out a sigh. "Here's the deal. Mr. Thompson, the HOA has the right to enforce its rules, but it does not have the right to destroy private property. Your workers need to stop the removal immediately, and if the homeowner decides to press charges, you'll have to explain yourself in court." Richard clenched his jaw. Diane turned pale, her eyes darting nervously toward the crowd of neighbors still recording. "I want to press charges," I said firmly. The officer nodded. "Then, Mr. Thompson and Ms. Mercer, we'll need both of you to come down to the station to provide statements regarding trespassing and property damage allegations." Diane stood frozen. Richard stiffened, his face stretching in shock. Marcus stepped beside me, smirking. "Guess they didn't think this through when they decided to play dirty." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "Richard Thompson, Diane Mercer, I'm officially notifying you that your HOA is under investigation by the State Energy Commission for the unlawful obstruction of renewable energy installations." A dead silence settled over the street. Richard's hand trembled as he took the envelope. Diane shook her head repeatedly, her mouth slightly open. "What?" she stammered. I smiled. "I'm the lead investigator on this case, and thanks to you, I now have the perfect new piece of evidence." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shattered window, my $10,000 solar panels being ripped down, and Diane Mercer's smug expression as she held up a clipboard filled with my so-called violations. But the HOA had made a critical mistake. They had no idea just how prepared I was. I switched on my desk lamp, opened my laptop, and began organizing every piece of evidence I had. More than a dozen letters from local residents, all denied the right to install renewable energy systems for ridiculous reasons. They claimed my solar panels ruined the neighborhood's aesthetics. Then why had they also rejected Marcus's backyard panels, or Mrs. Jenkins's wind turbine? I checked my email. A message from my boss at the State Energy Commission. I've approved your request. This neighborhood is now officially under investigation. Gather more documentation. We need an airtight case. I smiled. The game had just changed. The next morning, as soon as I stepped outside, Marcus waved me over from across the street. I've got something you need to see, he said, pulling out his phone. On the screen was a video recorded from his window, capturing a conversation between Richard Thompson and an unfamiliar man standing next to an HOA truck. "You're sure this won't cause any problems?" Richard asked, his voice low but clear. The other man, dressed in an expensive suit, wearing dark sunglasses, smirked. "We can't let these solar systems spread. They're cutting into our company's profits. Just keep rejecting applications, and the money will keep flowing into your account, same as always." My blood boiled. Who the hell is he? Marcus scrolled quickly through his phone, then stopped at a photo. James Callahan, Regional Director of Sunshine Electric. I took a deep breath. Now I understood why the HOA was fighting us so hard. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was corruption. That very afternoon, I drove straight to the HOA office, a small, unimpressive building in the center of the neighborhood. Diane Mercer sat behind the reception desk, her hand resting on a thick stack of files. When she saw me walk in, she arched an eyebrow, a faint smirk appearing on her lips. "We're just about to close," she said, her tone dripping with implication. I placed my phone on the desk and pressed play, letting the video Marcus had just sent me play right in front of her. Diane's face went pale. "Where did you get this?" "The more important question is what it proves," I said, my voice firm. "The HOA has been taking bribes to block renewable energy installations in this neighborhood. That is illegal." She swallowed hard. "You don't have the right to access our meeting records. Those are internal documents." I tilted my head slightly, offering a small, knowing smile. "Really? Then why do I hear payments from Sunshine Electric being discussed in this recording?" Her face went rigid. "I want to see the minutes from the most recent meeting on this issue," I continued, my gaze locked onto her. Diane clenched her jaw, then stood up. "Wait here." About 10 minutes later, she returned with a thick folder. I flipped through the pages quickly. Every single renewable energy proposal had been denied without any reasonable explanation. No justifications, no legitimate grounds. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and immediately sent the documents to my boss. Less than a minute later, he called me back. "Good work. We now have enough to move forward." "So, what's the next step?" "Officially notifying the HOA that they're under investigation, and do it in front of as many witnesses as possible." That night, I sent a message to Marcus and several other neighbors, telling them to be at the community meeting the following evening. The next day, I walked into the neighborhood community center, facing Richard Thompson, Diane Mercer, and the rest of the HOA board. Richard was mid-sentence when I dropped a thick stack of documents onto the table. "Mr. Thompson, your HOA is now officially under investigation by the State Energy Commission for violating the Energy Protection Act." The room fell silent. Diane's mouth hung open. Richard's grip tightened on the arms of his chair. "We have evidence that the HOA has been accepting bribes from Sunshine Electric to prevent residents from using renewable energy." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. A woman stood up. "So this wasn't just about aesthetics?" An older man, one of the longtime residents, turned to Richard. "You took money from the power company for your own gain?" I kept my voice steady. "Starting today, all HOA activities will be under scrutiny. Every action you take from this point forward will be recorded and added to the legal case." Diane shot up from her chair. "You can't do this." I met her gaze, unwavering. "Not only can I just did." I jerked awake in the middle of the night to a sharp crashing sound from my living room, glass shattering. My heart pounded as I leaped out of bed, gripping my phone, ready to call the police. I glanced at the security camera feed on my phone. 3 men stood on my front lawn. 2 held crowbars. The third was already climbing a ladder, reaching for the last of my solar panels. I threw open the front door, stepping into the freezing night air in nothing but my pajamas. My voice rang out, cutting through the darkness. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Under the glow of the streetlights, I saw Richard Thompson standing there, unfazed, with Diane Mercer beside him, clipboard in hand, scribbling notes as if this were some routine HOA inspection. Richard didn't flinch. "We are enforcing community regulations. You had your chance to comply, but you chose to resist." I looked up at my roof, where one of the workers had already pried a solar panel loose, preparing to take it down. Rage surged to the top of my skull. "Get down immediately, or I'm calling the police." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Diane scoffed. "Go ahead. The HOA bylaws allow us to correct violations if a homeowner refuses to comply." Correct violations by smashing my window in the middle of the night? I pointed toward my shattered living room window, glass littering the floor inside. Richard arched an eyebrow. "That was an unfortunate accident. We can deduct the repair cost from the fines you owe the HOA." I almost laughed at the audacity. Did they really think they could do this without consequences? I didn't waste another second arguing. I held up my phone, recording them directly. "The police will be here in a few minutes, and I guarantee you this won't just be another petty HOA dispute." At that moment, Marcus stormed out of his house across the street, flashlight in hand, shining it directly at the HOA crew. "What the hell is going on here?" he shouted. One by one, porch lights flicked on throughout the neighborhood. Doors opened, neighbors stepped out, staring in shock at the scene unfolding before them. "They're vandalizing my property," I shouted for everyone to hear. "They broke my window." They showed up in the middle of the night to illegally rip out my solar panels. A flicker of panic crossed Richard's face as he realized the growing crowd wasn't on his side. Diane swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously. Just minutes later, the wail of police sirens filled the night air, red and blue lights flashing against the walls of the neighborhood. 2 officers stepped out of their patrol car, hands resting on their holsters. One of them, a grizzled man with salt and pepper hair and the hardened expression of someone who had handled thousands of disputes like this, surveyed the scene before turning to me. "You the one who called this in?" I nodded, pointing up at my roof. "They're vandalizing my property, and I have everything recorded." The officer turned to Richard. "Mr. Thompson, do you understand that enforcement actions cannot be carried out at night, and certainly not by damaging private property?" Richard's jaw tightened. "We're simply enforcing HOA regulations." "I don't care what your HOA regulations say," the officer cut in sharply. "State law says HOA officials have no right to enter private property without the owner's consent, and if damage is caused, that's destruction of property." I couldn't stop the slight smirk that formed on my lips as Richard's face paled. Diane turned to slip away through the crowd, but the second officer blocked her path. "Mrs. Mercer, you'll need to stay. We need to assess your role in this." At the same time, another officer ordered the workers to stop immediately and leave my property. Marcus folded his arms, grinning. "Looks like the HOA isn't above the law after all." I took a deep breath, finally feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. But I knew this was just the beginning. As Richard and Diane were escorted toward the patrol car for questioning, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, holding it right up to Richard's face. "Mr. Thompson, I am officially notifying you that your HOA is under investigation for violating state energy laws." For the first time since I had known him, Richard Thompson was speechless. Diane stammered, "You're a government investigator?" I nodded, smiling as their expressions shifted from anger to fear. "That's right, and thank you both for just handing me the perfect evidence to take down your HOA." I sat at my desk, the cold blue glow of my laptop screen the only source of light in the room. The case file before me was so thick, I had to rub my temples just to keep my mind focused. What I had uncovered was no small violation. This was an organized corruption scheme. The HOA wasn't just banning solar panels for aesthetic reasons. They were being paid to do it. I opened an email from Marcus, attached with a secret recording he had taken during a private meeting between Richard Thompson and the HOA board. Richard's voice came through clearly. "The power company is losing money because of these solar installations. They need us to control the situation, and in return, they'll make sure we're always financially supported." Then another voice, Diane Mercer. What else can we do besides reject every application? They can't sue if we claim it's for aesthetic reasons. This was it. The proof. The HOA wasn't just blocking renewable energy. They were taking bribes to do it. I immediately forwarded the video to my boss at the State Energy Commission. His reply came within minutes. We have enough to launch a full-scale corruption investigation. This HOA is no longer just a neighborhood issue. The power company behind them will be investigated as well. I took a deep breath, realizing this fight had grown far beyond my small neighborhood. The next morning, I wasn't surprised to see a black SUV parked at the corner of my street. Dark tinted windows, engine idling, watching. I had expected this. The HOA was preparing to fight back, but I wasn't afraid. I pulled on my State Energy Commission jacket, grabbed a thick envelope containing all the evidence I had gathered, and walked straight into the HOA headquarters. Inside, Diane Mercer was speaking with Richard Thompson. Both looked tense. The moment they saw me, that tension turned to panic. "What are you doing here?" Diane's voice wavered. I placed the envelope on the table, locking eyes with Richard. "Your HOA is under investigation for corruption. I suggest you find a good lawyer." Richard opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, the door behind me swung open. 2 investigators from the Attorney General's office stepped in, holding search warrants. "Mr. Thompson, we need you and the HOA board to cooperate immediately. We have evidence that the HOA accepted bribes to block solar installations." The room froze. Diane's face turned ghostly pale. Richard gripped the edge of the desk, his hands trembling. I crossed my arms, a small smirk forming as I watched the power-hungry finally face justice. I knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. People like Richard Thompson and Diane Mercer don't accept defeat easily. They would do whatever it took to hold on to their power. 3 days after the investigation was made public, I received a thick envelope from an unfamiliar law firm. Inside was a lawsuit. They were accusing me of harassment, damaging the HOA's reputation, and disrupting the harmony of the community. I laughed out loud. Did they really think this would make me back down? But that was just the beginning. The next day, a flyer appeared in every resident's mailbox. "Our neighbor is destroying our property values." Below the headline was a photo of me, taken from an angle that no one should have had access to. Underneath, there was a list of fabricated accusations, claims that I was abusing my power, deliberately dividing the community, and trying to turn our neighborhood into an illegal green energy experiment. I stared at the flyer, anger simmering in my chest. They were willing to twist the truth just to protect themselves, but I was ready for this. I pulled out my phone and recorded a video right in front of my house. I didn't respond with anger. I responded with facts. "I am your neighbor. I've lived here for years, but I cannot stand by while the HOA illegally bans something that state law protects. They aren't just blocking renewable energy. They are taking money from the power company to do it. If they can do this to me, they can do it to any of you." I uploaded the video to our community forum. Within hours, it spread across the entire neighborhood. That evening, I received a message from Marcus. They're holding an emergency meeting at Richard's house, but this time, it's not just HOA loyalists. Other neighbors want to hear the truth too. I drove there, not in secret, not in fear. I wanted them to see I wasn't hiding. Inside Richard's spacious living room, more than 40 people had gathered. The air was thick with tension. Richard stood up, his voice dramatic, playing the victim. "We are being manipulated by an outsider. He's dragging the government into our community just to destroy our harmony." A woman rose from her seat. "Then what about the money the HOA took from Sunshine Electric? How do you explain that?" Richard's mouth fell open. No one believed his lies anymore. This time, they were the ones backed into a corner. I sat on the steps of my front porch, a cup of coffee in my hands, long gone cold. But I didn't care. The entire neighborhood was buzzing with news of the HOA corruption scandal. Early this morning, police arrived at the HOA headquarters with a search warrant. Curious neighbors gathered outside as they watched boxes of files being hauled away, each one filled with proof of Richard Thompson's shady deals and the board's illegal transactions. I wasn't surprised when I saw Richard being led out of the building in handcuffs, his face stiff, trying to hold on to the last remnants of confidence that had once allowed him to manipulate an entire community. Behind him, Diane Mercer looked even worse, her hair disheveled, eyes wide with panic, as if she had only just realized the fight was over. They had lost, and everyone knew it. An hour later, my phone rang. Catherine Reynolds, a senior investigator from the Attorney General's office. "We didn't just take down the HOA," she said. "This morning, the FBI raided Sunshine Electric's offices. They found evidence of millions of dollars funneled to HOAs across the state to block renewable energy installations." I took a deep breath. What started as a small fight between me and the HOA had erupted into a statewide corruption investigation. "Sunshine Electric's CEO resigned this morning," Catherine continued. "The company is now facing a federal probe for market manipulation and bribery of HOA officials." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I had fought for my right to install solar panels, but I never imagined that battle would expose one of the biggest corruption schemes in the energy industry. That afternoon, I drove through the neighborhood and saw something I never would have imagined just weeks ago. Homes across the community installing renewable energy systems. Solar panels now gleamed under the sunlight, free from the oppressive control of a corrupt HOA. I pulled up in front of Marcus's house, where a crew was busy installing his new solar panels. He stepped outside, grinning, and clapped me hard on the shoulder. "Without you, we never would have taken back our neighborhood." I smiled, glancing around. This community had changed, and it would never go back to the way it was. The air in the neighborhood had never felt lighter. After years of living under the thumb of a corrupt HOA, the residents had finally reclaimed their freedom. This morning, as I stepped outside, I didn't see Diane Mercer's watchful glare or Richard Thompson's smug smirk. They were gone, along with the HOA empire they had built. A new sign had been posted in front of what used to be the HOA headquarters. "This community is now resident-run. No more HOA." I stood there for a moment, staring at the words, as if to make sure this wasn't just a dream. That afternoon, I attended a special meeting, organized by the residents, not the HOA. No more ridiculous rules, no more threats, just neighbors coming together to discuss how to build a better, fairer community. Eleanor, one of the older residents who had been bullied by the HOA for years, stood up to speak. "For so long, I was afraid of the HOA, afraid to plant a flower that wasn't the right color." She paused, then grinned. "Well, today I'm planting an entire garden, and no one can stop me." Laughter filled the room, but we all knew. It wasn't just a joke. It was a symbol of the freedom we had fought for. That evening, as I sat on my porch, I looked out at the neighborhood. The glow of newly installed solar panels flickered in the darkness, like beacons signaling the start of a new era. Marcus walked over, 2 cold beers in hand, tossing one to me. "I still can't believe we actually did it." I popped the tab, took a long sip of the ice-cold drink. "We didn't do this alone. This was the power of an entire community standing up against injustice." Marcus grinned, raising his beer. "To a neighborhood free from the HOA." I laughed, but deep down I knew the truth. This wasn't just about our neighborhood. People across the country had been watching our story, and if we could do it, so could they. Justice wasn't just served here. It was only the beginning. 3 months later, I stood behind a podium at the state government building, facing a room full of representatives from communities across the state. They had gathered for one reason. They wanted change. I was no longer just a homeowner fighting for my solar panels. Now, I was leading a movement, one demanding accountability from corrupt HOAs. I took a deep breath, meeting the eyes of the government officials before me. For too long, we have allowed HOAs to abuse their power. They have blocked innovation, intimidated homeowners, and taken money from power companies for their own gain. Today, we change that. The room erupted in applause as the new bill was passed, a law protecting homeowners from corrupt HOAs, guaranteeing the right to renewable energy without interference. That evening, I returned to my neighborhood where families gathered in celebration under the glow of newly installed solar panels. Children laughed and played in yards, no longer bound by the absurd rules of a power-hungry HOA. Eleanor approached, taking my hand, her eyes shining. "You changed everything," she said. I smiled. "Not just me, all of us." And as the lights shimmered on rooftops all around us, I knew this wasn't just a victory. It was a new beginning. This story isn't just about one man protecting his solar panels. It's a story about the power of perseverance, courage, and community unity. The first lesson: never let anyone take away your rightful freedoms. No matter your age, where you live, or your status, you always have the right to fight for what is right. The HOA abused its power for years, but once the residents stood up, they reclaimed their freedom. The second lesson: injustice thrives in silence. Had the protagonist not gathered evidence and stood his ground, hundreds of families might have continued to suffer under the HOA's oppressive rule. But because one person refused to back down, an entire community was transformed. Lastly, this is a lesson about the power of collective action. One person can start a fight, but true victory requires people willing to stand together, speak the truth, and challenge corruption. For those who have lived many years and seen the world change, remember, you're never too old to stand up for what you believe in. Justice has no age limit, and a community is only as strong as the individuals willing to defend what's right.